The question I get asked a lot is, do they know what they're doing? I mean, is this purposeful? Is this conniving? Or do they just do it so routinely that they have long since lost any awareness that they're doing it?
So abusers don't really just lie in moments, right? They build these entire realities that feel so much safer than the truth. And today I have an amazing guest to talk about how abusers build this story. We're going to get really in depth here. How did we fall for it? What happened? What are they doing that makes this, relatively speaking, so easy for us to believe? There's a concept of the story-based fortresses that we are going to talk about today. But I want to first introduce my guest. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Well, and great to be with you this morning. My name's Alan Godwin. I'm a licensed psychologist in Nashville, Tennessee. When I first moved here, Nashville was not an exciting place. It's become the it city. So I moved here before it was cool to move here. So I've been practicing as a psychologist during that time. And when you go through graduate school, some people kind of know what lane they want to be in, and they pursue that. I didn't necessarily know. But what I found out as I practiced was I did find myself in a lane, and that had to do with people that came into my office who were distressed. They might have been depressed or have anxiety issues, but didn't necessarily know how to define why, what was going on. And what I found out and this is a common theme, after I would talk to them for a while, what started to become evident was that they were in relationships that don't function normally. And there's a real disorder to the function of that relationship, but they didn't necessarily know that. They didn't really necessarily understand that, but it was working on them. And it was affecting what was going on between their ears, and sometimes what was going on below their necks too. It would have a real physiological effect. So what I started realizing is that it's pretty common for people to be in relationships, and the word that I've come to use over the years is drama. We tend to say that so-and-so is a drama queen or a drama king, or you might say it's a real soap opera over there in that office. But I think that's actually a technically useful term, because what happens in a drama with somebody is it's not a relationship that functions in reality, but the only way they know to relate is to get you to participate with them in that drama. So my role in the drama is this, your role in the drama is that. As long as we both stay inside of our drama roles, we'll have a great relationship. So relational success is contingent upon drama participation. And what I was finding over the years is that drama participation really takes its toll on people. And a lot of times it would work on them so long that they'd come into an office like mine saying help. So what I found was a lot of what I was found myself in attempting to do is to help them develop the ability to become drama non-participants. If they can figure out ways to stop their participation in the drama, that helps them. In some cases, it makes the relationship worse, but it helps. So I ended up writing a book back in 2008. It was called How to Solve Your People Problems. And so part of that is about how to resolve conflict. The other part is how to deal with these kind of people. And in the book, I refer to them as unreasonable people because they are unreasonable. They have neither the ability nor willingness to resolve things. They just want you to participate with them in the drama. And so that was the thrust of that book. And a lot of times the question they would pose to me is, why didn't I see it before? How could I have been so blind? It's so clear to me now. Was I just stupid? And it wasn't that they were stupid. They might be very intelligent people, but you can't see what you can't see. But over time, it starts to show up. About 10 years ago, I started noticing something a little bit different. And that was people were coming in saying things, not so much, how could I have been so blind? But the question shifted a little bit like, how can Uncle Irving be so blind? He's now wrapped up in this conspiratorial web of things where they just believe crazy things. And I've always thought Uncle Irving was super intelligent, very rational, but he's changed. He's a different person now. So what I started realizing was what I had been observing for so long that was happening to people on an individual level was starting to happen to people collectively, where masses of people were getting duped by, in some cases, a demagogue, or in other cases, a demagogic system. They were so wrapped up in it. So I spent about 5 years thinking about that and about 5 years writing about that. I'm not a fast writer. So that book has just come out in October. It's called Ties That Blind. And, what it is that blinds people is their ties to the coalitional instinct. They get pulled into these groupings because they want connections. But once they're in those connections, the implicit demand is you have to buy into the alteration of reality inside that. And that's what you referred to it a minute ago. I call it a story-based fortress, because there's a difference between the truth and a story that sounds true. And so they were buying into this altered reality.
I love it. I think it explains your background and who you are really well, actually. And it's so interesting. I think what I deal with, I have a lot of clients who are victims and or survivors of abuse and mistreatment and toxic relationships. And maybe the person's narcissistic, maybe they're borderline, maybe they're not. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But they sit and they don't understand what on earth is going on in their relationship. And I deeply relate to that feeling of, all I know is this isn't normal and we're not getting along. And it's like nothing I do is ever going to make this better. So when you're talking about they just want you in the drama, like that's just absolutely on point. It felt like they didn't want to be healthy. That's the pattern that I just constantly see, is the desire for chaos and drama.
They're like emotional pickpockets. They get you looking over there, and while they're looking over there, they're picking your pocket over here. And then later you're wondering where your wallet went.
Yeah. I once wondered where my wallet actually went, literally. So yeah, I get that.
It's an old book now. Back in 1980, a book came out called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. And then 2 years later, he wrote a book called The People of the Lie. And I think the most salient line in his whole book, I can repeat it right now, and here it is. It's lies confuse. It's a 2-word sentence, but I think it's packed with meaning, because lies confuse people. And you can get so wrapped up in this alteration of reality that you can't tell. You lose your moral compass. You lose your bearings, and it really does mess with your brain to get wrapped up in that.
That's so, so true. And it's really hard to step out of it. I think we want so badly to believe that our loved ones are telling us the truth. And I feel like even once proven a liar, you still really want the truth to be something a little bit more palatable. And I think the way that some people are just really good at kind of creating this narrative and creating this story that they're the misunderstood hero or they're the injured victim, right? They're so good at playing the victim, pulls us into the story. And then it's hard to not see that. How do you think they're doing that? How do they accomplish it?
Well, I think a normal person, I'm going to assume that both you and I are normal people. What we tend to want to do is give people the benefit of the doubt. And we like for people to do that for us. So don't assume the worst of us. Give us the benefit of the doubt. And I think what people in this category that we're talking about, they exploit people's tendency to give the benefit of the doubt when it's not deserved. And so if you have a default position, you might say, well, they're having a bad day. This is a one-off. I'll go ahead and give them the benefit of the doubt. But what you see as time goes on is that's not just a one-off, it's a pattern. So initially they exploit that. I think another thing they exploit is generally they're nice people. They're likable people. They've got compelling, interesting traits. They may be very smart. They may be very personable. And so we want to have a relationship with them, particularly if you're related to them. And so they exploit our need for attachment. And somehow they get underneath all that, and we find ourselves attached to them, even though it's a toxic attachment. We didn't see it at first. And I'll just say this here. The question I get asked a lot is, do they know what they're doing? I mean, is this purposeful? Is this conniving? Or do they just do it so routinely that they have long since lost any awareness that they're doing it? And I think both answers are applicable depending on the person. I think there are some people that have been doing it so long, and this is their standard operating procedure. They don't know they're doing it. And you point it out, or you try to point it out, and they honestly deny it because they can't see it. I think there's other people that they have some awareness of the fact that they're doing it, and it's deliberately exploitative. But what I found is they don't see themselves as the bad guys. They see themselves as bad guys who are doing it to accomplish a good purpose.
Right.
So even bad people can do bad things if it accomplishes good, and they see themselves as the good guy in the drama, and you're the bad guy. So I think they're really good at being able to sniff out where our vulnerabilities are, and they can exploit those vulnerabilities. And they look for weak spots in our defenses, and you can get hoodwinked without even knowing you've gotten hoodwinked.
Yeah. It feels like it happens so quickly. I think, I talk a lot about how trauma bonds are built. And I think that those early stages of they're giving you everything and they're mirroring you and, falling in love, it feels like they build that trust and dependency. And then that sort of lays the groundwork for cruelty and deception because you already trust them. It feels like you're too late.
Yeah, I tell people, tell clients sometimes, what would be easier is that if this person you're having these struggles with, if they were a consistent slime ball all the time, they'd be easier to deal with because then you could, it's just simpler to kind of put them in that category. But what's confusing is they may be that way sometimes, and other times they just seem wonderful and stellar.
Right.
And usually their negative qualities don't show up that much until you're close to them. And so people from a distance, for instance, they may come to you and say, let's say this is your relative, they'll come to you and say, I tell you what, your mother is just the finest person I've ever met in my whole life. You were so lucky to be raised by her. You must just thank God every single day that you were raised by somebody like her. And the person is thinking, you have no idea what my mother's actually like, because they relate to them from a distance. And they don't see from a distance what's manifestly obvious up close. So it's very confusing.
I agree. I used to get all the time, you're so lucky. You're so lucky to be with a guy like him. He this, he that. And I'm like, because I don't want to be like, you have no idea what it's like. The confusion is always in that oscillation. And I think that's a huge part of it, right? The kindness mixed with cruelty. You never know when the cruelty is coming. The highs are so high, even though the lows are so low. That's the addiction to the cycle, I suppose. It's really, really hard. This story, it's not really built all at once, right? It's piece by piece. I think that slow construction of it. Why do you think that is what makes it so convincing?
I think if people knew up front the full extent of the story, they would automatically resist being pulled into it. So, I don't mean to use the old worn out analogy about the frog in the water, but it's that old proverbial. That's actually not true, by the way. Frogs will actually jump out of
Right.
water.
I'm glad you said that because actually I know that's a myth, but I love the story. So keep going. It's not true.
It's just not true. But you acclimate yourself to the temperature changes a little bit at the time until finally you are boiling and you just don't even know it. So you didn't know how you got there. Now, I find that people's insight into this is really good in hindsight. And that's why people can be so self-deprecating. Why didn't I see it? And how could I have been so blind? I think the question they a lot of times ask is, how could I have been so stupid? And it's really not stupidity. It's just that, you can't see what you can't see. And the important thing is to make use of what you do see later on. So I try to, with clients who are dealing with this stuff, try to help them not be so hard on themselves. It doesn't do any good to be hard on yourself. You didn't see it. Well, now you do. Now what do you do about it?
Yeah, just do something now. I feel like we hold ourselves accountable for what we know now, but didn't know then. Because I feel like our brains can't remember what it was like to not know. You mentioned how obvious it becomes at one point. You just can't see it. You can't not see it anymore. It's right there in front of you, but you didn't know back then. So now you know, now you can do something about it. You can change your behavior as needed. But a lot of women do feel that way, Stupid is definitely the number one word that I hear. Like, I must be stupid because I didn't see this. But no, they're that good. And I don't say that to be complimentary to this type of exploitative, manipulative person, but they are so good at it. And they convince the people around us, not just us. It's all part of the building blocks, I think, of how they create this whole story. Everybody thinks they're nice and believes them.
And here's the other thing about the people we're talking about. They have highly skilled abilities to mimic normality, and they're not normal. They operate in a very abnormal, dysfunctional manner, but they're not stupid. And they're able to look around them and know what normality looks like, and so they can mimic it. And they can, in some ways, their emotional survival is always dependent upon their acting ability. So they can mimic what looks normal, and people who want to give the others the benefit of the doubt will believe that that's what's true. But it's usually not evident except over time and exposure, because the longer you're in a relationship with them, the more you realize something about this is not right. I'm seeing some things now that really it's always been the case, and I've never quite known why it affects me the way it does, but this is really off. So a lot of times people will start to have their own internal gut checks, that my guts have been reading this for a while. I've been ignoring it, and now I can't ignore it any longer. So what was vaguely recognizable before starts to become clear with the passage of time. But even then, I think the tendency that people have is to give them the benefit of the doubt. So it goes on longer. So yeah, I don't think they necessarily know what they're doing. Some do, but I think a lot of them, this is the way they've always been, and they don't know how to do anything else. So to them, this is their only relational method is drama. What we do as normal people, if you have problems with somebody, you engage in a problem-solving process, where you talk things through, you resolve your differences, you clear things up as you go. And that requires that people be able to deal with their own negative contributions to the problem.
Yeah.
These people don't have what's required to deal with their flaws. And so they have to construct an alternate method of relating, and I think as good a word as any for that alternate method is called drama. So the way the drama works is my role in this relationship is this, your role in the relationship is that. As long as we both stay inside of our drama roles, we'll have a great relationship. So, but it's not a great relationship. It works great for them. So as long as you do what you're supposed to do, you get along. But it's a contingent relating, because if you ever step outside of your drama obligation, pressure is going to be brought to bear on you to get back into your drama role.
Yeah, it's no matter what you do. And I mean, that really describes certainly me, but so many women that I talk to, men and women, but I deal with women, but you feel like you're trying, you feel like you're doing something. They tell you if you would just this, then that wouldn't happen. So you stop doing that, but it still happens. And it's a crazy making thing of you can't win. You're living in a double bind, a real life, 24-hour a day double bind.
Yeah.
Like you're always trying to get your needs met, thinking you're in a reciprocal relationship with someone, and you're not.
And they're really good at, a few years ago, if somebody had used the term gaslighting, nobody would know what that meant. Now everybody on the planet uses the term gaslighting. But it's a really good term because it comes from that 1944 movie called Gaslight, where, I won't give away the plot, but the husband in the movie was trying to tell his wife that what she had seen and heard with her own ears never happened. And basically what he was saying, don't trust your senses, trust me. And those things never happened. Trust me to tell you what happened. And so if the gaslighting works, the person then starts to think, maybe I really am crazy. Maybe I misheard it. Maybe what I saw and heard was my own distortion of reality. If the gaslighting works, the person gets all wrapped up in that, and they lose their grip on what's real and what's not. Mm-hmm. So it's another exploitative technique.
Yeah, it's crazy making. Gaslighting is just, you lose your identity so much in that. And these are things that I think the average person, we don't think about identity and attachment. We're just living life, And when you start to really fall apart inside one of these relationships, you truly don't know who you are. You don't trust yourself. So a lot of people will say, why do you stay in contact with this person? Different when it's family, I suppose. But in a marriage, in a personal relationship, romantic relationship, why don't you just leave? You don't even know if you should leave. I think a lot of times you wonder if you're causing the problems and you're going to go and leave somebody who's probably not the problem. You're the problem, I think. You don't know.
Tell you a quick story. I had a client a number of years ago his business partner was one of these people, and for 30 years. And he said what he had learned was about every Friday afternoon, his partner would walk into his office, slam the door, and chew him out for 30 minutes and say, this is going wrong, that's going wrong, you need to fire the secretary. He'd make all these demands. He said it was so loud and raucous that you could hear the commotion throughout the entire business complex. And my client said what he had learned to do is he would wait till the guy ran out of steam and he'd look at him, he'd say, that's all real interesting. You want some gum? And it would not address us. And the guy would bluster for a few more minutes, leave the office and say, oh, you're just impossible to deal with, slam the door. And my client said, then I could get on back to work. So I knew it would take about another week before he'd do it again. And that's how he had learned to exist inside that environment, because arguing with the guy was all it would do is make things worse.
Oh, yeah.
And he said that he had kind of learned how to contain it in this way. He did that before he ever met me. I didn't coach him how to do that, but I thought that was brilliant.
I actually kind of think that's brilliant. I'm big on not giving into the baiting, because they want the drama, they want the argument, the chaos, they want you dysregulated and exhausted.
That's exactly right.
So it's so easy to say, right? Just sit and sort of, I don't even mean receive it, but just sort of sit and let it happen. Let them exhaust themselves and then offer them some gum, or just not engage in it in some way. And then, right, you're right that it happens again a week later, or whatever the length of time is, because I know it's different.
It's going to happen again. Yeah. But
I
had another client that her husband would do something similar to that. And she'd just look at him and she'd say, okay, point noted, and just leave the room, And because she realized there's no amount of discussion that's going to make any difference. He's just going to use whatever I said and twist it to fit his own purposes. And so that is very counterintuitive to do that. And that really runs against the grain in most people's human nature, because what we feel like we ought to do is stand up to that person and argue for what's true. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. I wish you could say that. Yeah. I think convincing someone who has no interest in the truth is obviously quite the challenge, to say the least. It's an impossible task. They don't want you to be right. You could be right. You could have video evidence. You could have facts, statistics, proof. It doesn't matter, because they want to believe what they believe. I'm not even sure. I mean, a lot of people will say they believe their own lies. I think there's a bit of an oxymoron in that. It's not that they believe lies or they perceive them as lies, but they believe them. That's their reality. So it's a lie to you. To them, it's real. To them, it's true. So why argue? Just extricate yourself somehow. I know I'm not saying just leave. I know it's very hard, my good heart, but the goal is to not be in these relationships long term, if you can get yourself out.
What I find myself spending a lot of time with clients in my office doing is coming up with strategies of drama non-participation. Now, that varies depending on the relationship and the circumstances. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all way to do that. And a lot of times we have to craft that given their particulars and their situation. But ultimately, that's what's going to help them, is to become drama non-participant. And I'll throw this in here. There are some people, I kind of divide this into three different categories of responses to drama non-participation. There are some people that if you refuse to participate in their drama, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to escalate the drama and get worse. But if you leave them in that place of escalation all by themselves and you refuse to ever become part of the drama, there's a segment of people that will actually respond to that frustration in a positive way and start to actually grow. So they actually can, over time, emerge out of that place. I mean, sometimes it's fashionable to say these people never change, don't waste your time. I think a lot of people never change, and it is a waste of time. But there's some people that if you refuse to participate in their drama, it will be so discombobulating to them that they'll respond to that frustration by starting to grow some parts they never had before. So they can actually start to develop what's not there. So that's one level. I think another level is they're not going to grow. They will escalate the drama and eventually end the relationship with you and take their drama show to someone else who is a more willing participant. And so with the first level, the person changes. With this level, the relationship changes. It may become non-existent, or it may become much more limited. There's a third level of people, if you don't participate in their drama, they really become dangerous. And they will hurt you, or they will try to destroy you in some way. So here we're talking about domestic abusers, we're talking about mob bosses, terrorists, people that they are a threat to you physically. Or it may be not physical, but it may be financial. They'll destroy your ability to ever make a living in this city again, or they'll destroy your reputation. They'll kill your reputation. So that's I think it's helpful to have the understanding that everybody's response to drama non-participation is not the same. It kind of depends on the person. And sometimes you don't know until you've done it and find out what happens.
Right. And the test is very dangerous. And it, again, depending on who you're talking to. But yeah, I probably unknowingly engaged in this non-participation. I'm not even sure what language I used in my own head back then, because now I would say not being baited into this argument or this drama. But it for me, I was in that third category, so it created violence. How would you suggest people assess what they might be facing?
That's a wonderful question, and I don't know if I have a wonderful answer to that. I think part of it, and this is kind of obvious to say this, but I think part of it is what's been the history. Have they ever done something that's dangerous? Have they ever or threatened something that's dangerous? If so, you need to proceed with caution and don't just assume it's going to be okay, but you may have some history that with this person that would suggest, I don't know that I trust my safety with this person. So I think you have to pay attention to that. And with some people, you have to have a safety plan. If you're going to do this, have a go bag or something, where you can have some friends that know your whereabouts, or you have a place to go, if you ever need to. I think the other two levels, it's a little bit more ambiguous, exactly what might happen, because I'm trying to help people not assume that if they become drama participants, that's going to end the relationship, because I've seen it happen the other way. I mean, they really do step out of it, and surprise of surprise, a person actually does start to grow and they develop. And they don't turn into a perfect individual, but they may start to develop some reason abilities that they never appeared to have, but you wouldn't have known that had you continued operating inside the drama. So sometimes stepping outside the drama reveals the true nature of what's there. And there's other people that are going to just double down and they're going to become worse. And so you kind of have to be prepared to say, I don't want the relationship to end, but it may end.
Yeah.
And it will end because I'm going to relate normally, but that doesn't mean the other person will. And if they choose not to, as sad as I might be about that, that may be what I have to live with.
It's sad to think that the relationship would end. I think I also deal with a population of people who are like, I'm not interested in the relationship being over, but I do hope that this person gets better, or what can I do to help them? That's a difficult spot to be, because I think at the end of the day, what I think I'm hearing is focusing on yourself is big. It's a huge part of this, whether you're not at the stage of making the decision to leave or to stay. I think focusing on yourself and I say your contributions, I don't mean we're contributing to our own abuse. I mean, any dynamic in the relationship. I can't control if the other person is cruel or kind or moody or screaming at me, but I can control if I participate in the drama, and I'm in control of myself, and I can decide if I want to fight, if I want to not fight, if I want to leave the relationship. I just want people to know they have the power.
Right. Yeah. And the nature of a drama, and there's multiple types of dramas, but the nature of a drama is, if I'm this person, my role is this, your role is that. And you're only permitted to be the part of yourself that I need you to be. So if I'm a controller, what I need from you is submission. And as long as you use the submission part of yourself to relate to me, we will have a match made in heaven, and so everything is wonderful and peachy and keen. And so what people don't realize is, to be in a relationship with somebody like this, they've had to diminish themselves to have the relationship that the other person demands. They've had to take some parts of their personality and put them off to the side and only be the part that person allows. So when I talk about drama non-participation, I'm not saying that you get up in the person's face and you wag your finger in their face and say, see here, narcissist, I'm not going to be who you need to be. But it's more, I'm not going to be that one part. I mean, if submission is appropriate in a certain setting, sure, but I'm not going to only be the submissive part. I'm going to be the other parts of me that I need to be, realizing that when I do that, that person's going to resist it. So part of drama non-participation is just the determination that I'm not just going to be the part they need. I'm going to be the other parts myself. So that's a part of what it means to become a drama non-participant, is that just be who you are. And there are some people that will say, well, if you're going to do that, I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. But like I say, there's a subset that it's so discombobulating to the person, it drops sand into their mental gears. And they don't know what to do with that. And there are some people that can actually start to develop what they don't have. And so that's why I try to tell people it's not necessarily over, but you won't know until you become a non-participant.
Right. And it's good either way. At least you know what you're dealing with. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, I want to shift a little. You have said that people will sort of cling to this false story if it meets their attachment and identity needs. How does that actually show up in an intimate relationship?
We all want attachment. I mean, that's part of our wiring is that we're wired for attachments. And so, whether it's a spousal relationship or it's friendships, we really yearn to be connected to other people. Now, we're not all exactly the same there. There's some people that are more introverted, some are more extroverted, but regardless of where you fall in that continuum, we all have attachment needs. So these people that we're talking about can appeal to those attachment needs. And so what they seem to promise is if you want your attachment needs met, here's a place to get those needs met. But what's not evident when you're doing that is that there's a price that comes with that attachment. So it's a little bit of a Faustian bargain. You make the deal to get into the relationship with this person, and then you find out there's more required of you in this relationship than I let on. So you got pulled in by your attachment needs. Now, if you've stayed in it long enough, after a while, that starts to become your self-definition. This is kind of who I am. I am a person in this relationship. And we also don't want to give up identity needs very easily. So the thought is, if I get out of this relationship, who am I? And so the identity needs can be exploited to pull somebody into a drama arrangement, and your identity needs can be exploited to keep you in that arrangement. So, they kind of get you coming in and get you when you're trying to leave, both ways.
We sort of live in this story that this person is, and I guess I'm talking about romantic partnerships, but you are in a healthy relationship and that you're the problem, or somehow I feel like the survivor or the victim is always taking on that they're the problem and their partner is maybe the victim. I don't know about victim of abuse, but like the victim of trauma and life circumstances. But yet generally I know it's not always the case, intelligent, self-aware, loyal, agreeable, conscientious people end up in these relationships. What are they doing that's overriding their own instincts, do you think?
Well, I think it's real easy to lose your bearings. You didn't see it, and then after you start to see it, you don't want to admit that you didn't see it. And it's a little bit shaming to think, I don't want to have to admit now that I missed something that was there in front of my eyes. And it's a little bit embarrassing to admit that. So, and then plus, like I was saying a minute ago, if you're a normal person, you kind of want to give the other person the benefit of the doubt. And so you continue to do that over and over, and then you continue to find out that they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt that you were granting to them. And so an awareness starts to emerge that now I'm in this damned if I do, damned if I don't situation. If I stay in, that's bad. If I get out, that's bad. And people can sit inside that dilemma for long stretches of time and just don't know what to do. When I say that's not in any way to be critical of people that are in that situation, because it's just very, very hard to know, because there's no good option. That's the way the thinking goes. Now, there is a good option that's it's ultimately going to be good for you to get out of it. But at the time, it doesn't look like there's any good option.
Yeah. I always say to people, it's like two sucky options right in front of you. Option A, pain. Option B, pain. How do you choose? Although, as you pointed out, right, one is forever pain and one is short-term pain. But long-term, you have a chance to get out and find yourself and focus on yourself and actually be happy and not live in this drama-filled story. Really?
Yeah, I try to get across to people sometimes. People can come to a place where they realize the pain of staying is greater than the pain of leaving. So it's going to be painful either way, but I got to choose my pain. And what I've determined is staying in this arrangement is going to be there's so much more long-term pain with this. There's going to be some short-term pain, but at least on the other side of that, there's some blue sky.
I think when we're stuck in this, the partner, the victim, the survivor, we become so responsible, not just for the abuser's emotions, but also upholding the story. I've often, and I guess, sadly, right, lots of personal experience here, but what I see in clients even is if we admit that this person is abusive, then you have to admit that you're just staying with an abuser. Are you stupid? So, of course, you're going to sort of uphold the story because you don't want people to know that you're the kind of person that would stay in an abusive relationship. You're dumb. So we don't tell people. On one hand, we're protecting them, especially if in the beginning, it's just an argument. I'm not going to go around slandering my partner and saying they're an abuser or a bad person because of a couple of arguments, because of a bit of bad behavior, because he's just traumatized or whatever we tell ourselves. But we're also protecting ourselves and them, the whole story. And they rely on this. And I think they use a lot of tactics. Gaslighting is definitely one of them, but, rewriting history and coercive control just to kind of get you in the story.
And you know what I find a lot? I see this happen quite often. Somebody I'm talking to in my office about this situation, trying to figure out what to do to extricate themselves from it. There's a price to pay. And they may have people in their lives who will say things to them like, well, I tell you what I would do. I would fill in the blank. And a lot of times that's easy for that other person to say, but they don't have the ramifications that this person's going to have from leaving. And so I think it's a legitimate choice for some people to say, there's a larger set of factors here that I'm going to maintain my presence in this drama for the time being, because right now the ramifications would be so destructive. So I'm going to ride it out for the time being. And that's different from saying, I just hope someday it gets better, and turn a blind eye. They know what they're doing. Their eyes are open, but they've maintained presence in it because they've weighed the cost. They've looked at they've done the cost benefit analysis, and they've determined, for the time being, I need to maintain this thing. And sometimes that's when kids are involved. So there's other factors that come into play there. So I try to I have a lot of latitude that I try to grant to people to say, regardless of what anybody else may say to you, this has got to be your choice. And just want you to make your choice with your eyes open. Regardless of what you choose, you need to know what you're choosing.
Oh, that's so true. I feel like we start to see things. There comes a point where you just, this seems like a pattern. You keep saying this, but then that. So once we start to kind of see it, I think we're resisting the truth. It shatters the whole story. But
Yeah.
What do you feel like that first kind of crack in the story usually looks like for the survivor?
I think it usually starts with a gut feeling. It's more you sense it before you see it and hear it. So, the sort of the popular term these days is spidey sense, that your spidey senses are tingling, and you may dismiss them at the time, but in hindsight, you look back and go, yeah, I've been feeling this for a while, but it just took some time for a pattern to emerge. And you may have some specific recollections of things that were done and things that were said by that other person, but a lot of times what precedes that is how it feels. So, and I try to get people to take feelings with a grain of salt. They may be telling you something accurate, they may not. Just don't disregard them and pay attention to them and see what happens with those over time. So usually I think that's kind of the first thing is that. And tell you another thing, we all have the tendency to normalize the abnormal and disregard things that are bothering to us. And so sometimes what happens is a person will tell a friend what this other person said or what they did, and the other person's, their jaw drops. I mean, their mouth is agape, and they go, "What?" And so what they're picking up from the other person is the sense of shock that you ought to be feeling, but you've numbed yourself enough to it that you didn't even realize it was shocking anymore. So sometimes what we pick up from other people, their reaction is instructive for maybe what we should be feeling when we just stop feeling it. Because there's a certain sense in which you kind of have to numb yourself to stay in these relationships for any period of time. So, the feedback of others, I think, is something that needs to be paid attention to and not disregarded.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think when we come out of this realizing, or at least feeling like you've been living in a lie, your whole life has been a story. I think for the people that have been in these relationships for decades long, I don't mean to compare trauma. I always feel like it's got to be harder if you're with my husband of 30 years or, something really long term. It feels like, has anything been real? Am I just, so you lose so much in that. It's like you've lost your life feeling like you have been living in a complete lie. So, of course, letting go of this is, painful doesn't feel like the right word, but profoundly painful.
Yeah, that's the identity part of it. Unwittingly, what's happened to you over time is your life inside that story has become you. It's become who you are. That's kind of your identity. And so the idea of stepping outside of this story and having to construct a different identity is awfully daunting. Now, I don't think you're really having to construct a different identity. I think you're recapturing the identity that you had and you lost.
Yeah.
But that's a hard thing to get across. But it can, I think there's some awfully strong forces that pull people into the story. There's some forces that make it very difficult to leave. And it's hard to know that there's life on the other side, but there is.
Yeah. I can attest to that. I tell a story sometimes about laying on the bathroom floor, scream crying into towels so my kids didn't hear me. Just absolutely devastated, shattered from everything that was happening, and honestly, shock and disbelief and all the things. And I couldn't imagine a life of not loving him. I couldn't imagine a life that didn't include him. And my worst nightmare was not being with him. And I look back and I'm like, my God, that was so dramatic. I honestly, my world was so wrapped up in that. And I am genuinely more happy, more me than I've ever been. And I know that life, and I know that's not everybody's story, but life is better without an abusive person in your life. I will die on that hill. That is, you will be happier in all or most ways eventually. You just got to get through that part that's worse first.
Yeah, I had a dispute with my daughter about what to subtitle my recent book. And the title is Ties That Blind. And what we ended up with was Unraveling Stories That Keep Us in the Dark. And I had to give her credit. That was actually her idea. The title I had before, she didn't like. She said it sounded too academic. She said I probably wouldn't read it. But what I was going to say as the subtitle was When We Embrace Stories That Distort Reality and Disintegrate the Self.
Oh.
So I've kept that theme. I just took it out of the subtitle, so she won that battle.
Right.
I'm glad that she won that battle.
I agree with her, but in terms of how it sounds, but I understand the concept of what you're. So I get it. I love that you kept the concept because it's in the first page or two as the theme of the book. And so to be in these relationships, it distorts reality, but it disintegrates. It disintegrates the self. And you have to become a lesser version of yourself in order to be part of this story, whether it's on an individual level or if this is happening collectively. So part of what happens if you are able to exit the story is you become a more integrated version of yourself. You become who you actually are, and you become all the parts of yourself now have the freedom to develop. And that's what's supposed to happen in healthy, normal relationships. Agreed. That is what's supposed to happen. A lot of people don't have that framework to even know, like, this is what healthy looks like and this is what unhealthy looks like if it's all you've ever known. So it's hard for people to recognize it. But I think once you start to see the patterns and you start to see the stories, and I think you start to realize that these lies and these stories being made in abusive relationships, they're not random at all. They're very strategic and very systemic. Yeah. I think we need to see that and then focus on ourselves to make decisions that ultimately will lead us right out of these relationships.
Yeah.
It's hugely important. Before we wrap up, do you think, is there anything, that you would want to say to survivors or victims that are still in the relationships of what they might need to know about these stories that might help them?
Yeah. There's a line, I'll quote you a line that I used in the book. My book is about two stories. One story is about an individual that got blinded by the story. The second one is how that happens collectively. And in both stories, I use this line that some people get lost in a cave, only illumined by a sliver of light, and wander further into the cave where there is no light. Other people follow the light and get closer and closer to the cave's entrance as they follow the light. So that's true on an individual level. It can happen also for people who get wrapped up in collective deception. So following the light is always a good idea. And I think there's some people that get so lost in the story, they're so far down in the cave, they don't even see any light anymore. And they may be irretrievable. I think there's other people that haven't disregarded the light And so just keep following the light. And I think one of the ways to put it, when somebody walks into an office like mine, that's kind of an act of following the light. They're trying to figure out, I don't know what that light is up there. I just know there's something better than this darkness that I'm in. So I think all that we're saying, I think, is ultimately hopeful, because there's always a chance that somebody can emerge from the darkness by following the light. I don't mean that to sound too poetic or esoteric, but I think there's truth to that.
I'm so appreciative of your knowledge and sharing this and you being here. I really encourage everyone to run and go get your book, because honestly, it was such a great read. I learned so much. I appreciate you and thank you for being here.
Well, it's been a pleasure being with you. I appreciate you having me on.